Accessibility is at the heart of everything that Plinko Solutions does in terms of bridging AI and empowerment. In order to do that, it does require you to stand on the shoulders of some really core foundational frameworks that I think will allow us to really hit the ground running. So 80% of what we do is really sharpening the axe so that when you swing it, it'll go through the tree you're swinging at. Within the next 30 minutes, I'll be breaking down a few different theories and frameworks that I have integrated over the last decade to really change and reframe how I use intelligence and is really core. So if you're interested in just taking this stuff right out of the box and you feel ready to hit the ground running, our link hub has all of the resources all readily available under orientation and program map. You can feel free to kind of go through this and take apart the previews and really begin the journey today. But if you're of the liking of doing things right and doing things with really best foundations you can, I think it's really great to start with structure. So creating something that doesn't have structure paradoxically requires you to take that structure from something else. By looking at the sort of outlier theory and what the 1% is doing, when I say the 1%, really just the best at whatever the operation is, we're able to see, it's really not how it all adds up, but what you counted along the way. What does that mean? If you don't strive to bring the subconscious to the conscious by reconciling these goals from previous versions of yourself, it will govern you and it will govern the world that you live in, and you will call it fate. Because of that, it's important to look at intelligence and understand that the way that you approach it may be limited, and that is A-okay. The goal is to work through that, and by really indulging and taking notes through the next 30 minutes or so, you will set yourself up for years of success that I wish I saw earlier on. So with that, let's get into it. Welcome to another episode by Plinko Solutions, a project and production brought to you around AI and accessibility. Today's a really cool one. We're going to dive really deep into the world of agentic browsing. What is agentic browsing? I'm talking about when AI runs through the browser on behalf of you. This has existed typically behind the scenes, kind of through this black box effect, through for a while, through browser use. If you're familiar with ChatGPT agent mode now, you're probably visualizing what I'm talking about, where it shows up a bit of a window and you just kind of run through it, or the AI runs through it rather. That's evolved, right? As of April 2025, we're pretty much introduced to a new way of doing it. This way is basically allowing something called echo. So if you're more on the technical side, you'll appreciate this. But echo is essentially putting a machine learning layer on top of the AI that's already running through the browser. There's a few visualizations of this that I've seen basically show it the best. So if you're non-technical, what this would look like, I'll show you here. So they have all these kind of marketing and showcasing what it kind of looks like to you. But what's happening on the technical side is actually where I'm most enthused, because you'll find that with ChatGPT agent mode, it runs out of memory. It kind of just runs, I don't want to say headlessly, but mindlessly, I would say. This one provides a natural interface that the AI is interacting with, that the AI is trained on interacting with, and then allowing it to then actually execute. This is how most algorithmic kind of technology works, especially in the hardware space. So being able to bring this into, the computer is really cool, right? The PC, the personal computer. One piece about it, it exists mostly within appliances at this current point. You have a fridge that sees what's inside of the fridge, analyzes those groceries, and then sends it to another processing model to be, make sense of that. We can now do all of that fun noise on the desktop or laptop, right? So what does that change actually look like? And how can I best kind of illustrate it for you? So before really ironing out what this looks like on the technical piece in even more detail, I would like us to kind of understand where we're at and I want to say landscape of things. So most people use AI as a search engine. They pick it up and they say, what can I learn more with? How can I, instead of Google, research something? What that's built on the premise of is a research framework. It's how people actually approach things. So before, the tools, they're very rule-based. They'll take your query and they'll say, okay, cool, this is what you're looking for. Let me go search for that. And it does the searching on your behalf. It's very predictable. We've had it for a while in the form of chatbots, right? But when it finds something outside of its context or outside of its understanding, it can break. So enter in the kind of copilot era, right? So the smart routers, the ones that actually have machine learning in it, and it actually learns from data. It improves the request, right? And this is typically where software kind of began to really grow. It grew before, obviously. I don't want to discount the dot-com bubble and everything before, because, tech has been growing at insane rates, regardless of the era. I think what helps you kind of understand this contextually is that most software that you build with this kind of premise takes months, right? Sometimes years. And now, with the new current landscape, right, that's become more commercially available, meaning it costs significantly less. It's significantly quicker to build software, or even specifically features within softwares that aid business process, right? They actually help you speed up things. Right. So an example of that being the code interpreter, MCP protocols, if you're not familiar with that, which is basically allowing easier connectivity, more stability, and consistency across the commercially available artificial intelligence. So in this piece, what I'm going to be going towards is not vibe coding, right? It's not, how can I build more software faster? Because that's just like, there are horses in that race, and I am no stallion in that, no Ferrari. But, however, so where does that come to life commercially, right? In terms of the different pieces with artificial intelligence. Well, if you're commercially using it, you've noticed now that it's much more than a search engine. It's an intelligence system. It's something that you work with in production while you're creating. And in doing that, you're able to kind of see what this thing is actually capable of, right? And that's often under talked about, which is why I'm doing this whole thing right now, right? So what am I hinting towards? Artificial intelligence, instead of operating by itself, can have artificial intelligence working with it in a specific trained way, right? So that enables the power of self-improvement. Now, I'm just going to get existential for a second without being dramatic. What I'm about to uncover in these next 30 days with what I'm working on has a very real risk of displacement, especially when it comes to agentic web browsers. Reason being, there are people in the world that make their entire living just on clicking, dragging, copying, analyzing text. And that is okay. That is good. That's a skill. That's a muscle you've learned. And now that you're able to identify that, my hopes in the work that I'm doing going forward is that it inspires more access around what AI can do to empower you, right? Whether or not I share this in terms of how this thing works, there are going to be corporations, there are going to be culture, there's going to be people at stake that will use this kind of technology, right? Having AI work for you in different layers, and use it for malice, use it for mal kind of practice. And that's not what I want to empower by any means. I'm looking to empower more of the people that are being, currently stressed by the financial, circumstances of the world, being in a business that lacks business infrastructure, working with leadership and management that, there's crosswires, there's chaos, there's confusion. AI has a very real capability and capacity to help you in those situations, right? So what I'm sharing is more of process towards that. Typically, what we're going to be looking at in these next 30 days is, I can't emphasize enough, it's important, almost significantly to the point where any other approach to AI doesn't make sense. Treat it like an intelligence system, right? The accuracy, the experimental nature of it, the power of it will continue to evolve. And if you're not taught to be critical about that, and not even just academic, but to look at these things and not treat it like it's gospel, because they do hallucinate, right? These are tools, these are processes. And if you're not tech, if you're not privy, especially to academic research, your usual source of insight around AI is from media. And we all know, without, again, too existential, what media pushes for. It's for your attention. It's for your power, right? It's more of a, I don't want to call it a distraction, because that discredits the capacity. And also what I'm doing here with, YouTube. There's a very real opportunity of access. And that's what I'm here to kind of, showcase. So that all being said, TED Talk over. Let me talk you guys through where the magic is. So, like I said, if you're not tech privy and you don't know much about the academic research behind this, you're more than likely have been in the dark around agentic browsers. So that comes with its own problems, because media is incentivized to more so catch your attention than it is to educate you on possibility. We don't have a lot of resources around that. So let's get into that. This is going to be a 10-episode series framed with a 5-day marathon at the end of the 3 weeks. I'm also going to be sharing a full 30-day program, which you can complete asynchronously and synchronously. If you're interested in that, hang out to the later half of this video and we'll dive into it. So with that, the next little bit is going to be showcasing more so about business infrastructure. So when I talk about business infrastructure, that can mean a number of things. In my line of work, I mainly have built AI and automation as a point of business processing, meaning, anytime you have data entry, anytime you have emails that are on repetition, features that you find, businesses doing quite frequently, and like really technology that you're just kind of, hot potato tossing around. There are ways to maximize this. And that's often been my past decade learning experience, is that, these things enter the market, but the actual utility and the frame for what it can do for you is often lost in context. So when I speak about business infrastructure, what I'm really referring to is what makes a business run, right? And this can be, extrapolated into, as you can imagine, absolute insanity. I think one piece that helps me kind of, I don't want to say understand, but illustrate it the best, is by breaking it into this leadership layer, this management layer, and the implementation layer, right? So currently, if you're familiar with my previous work on software architecture, you'll understand that teams and human capital is really the core responsibility, single source of truth for any of these, right? They just know things that no machine, or at least in my current, from what I've seen, can read your mind and extrapolate everything from. So what that requires you to do is to have directives, meaning you have to delegate work through mission and objective so that people actually do it. If you don't communicate what needs to be done, it doesn't get done. So that's what the leadership level is all about. It's communicating what needs to happen, right, at a department level, and then ensuring that the processes, the standard operating procedures are all in place to make that possible. The managers are the people, the layer that are actively ensuring things get done, managing time, managing resources. That's what it comes down to. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be sales, it could be research, it could be content, it could be whatever it is. If you're managing anything to any capacity, what you're looking for is resource, capacity, and how well does that measure against the goals and objectives, right? How well does that meet what leadership is looking for? And that's what we're looking at. So when we introduce, before I even get into AI in the equation, introducing these kind of worker, kind of like execution level business processes, this speaks to the art of discovery, asking real questions, looking at capabilities, and also understanding what it means to bring these into reality. So as you're looking into this and as I'm explaining this and you get excited about sharing it, as happy as I am to kind of support you in that, I do want to lay that critical lens once again. This is research purposes, okay? Without sounding too dramatic. As soon as you layer AI into this, very real risk come into the equation. Let's talk about that. So, all right, bear with me because this may seem theoretical, but I promise you, if you give me the next 5 to 10 minutes of your attention here, you'll have a light bulb go off that I've seen go off for so many people that I've worked with, and I've seen these limitations. And I'm like, if you frame it in the world that it's an intelligent system, which means it's a product of the mind. If it's a product of the mind, meaning that it works by natural language and thinking, then in order to actually work with it as an assistant, what do we need? We need like an actual system in place, like an actual organization, I would say. Okay, but we're one mind. We're only, we're thinking, right? If you've had this instance where you're using multiple ChatGPT here, DeepSeek, Claude, Anthropic, you have all these different models thinking with you, you understand what I'm about to describe. You're creating a echo chamber, almost like a faculty, a conversation, right? Amongst these different tools by copying from one, putting it into the other, slapping it on top of that, and it becomes an assembly line, right? It's AI working together. And we do it manually without even thinking about it. So if you've explored AI in this capacity, then you've already stepped into a world that is beyond just using it as a search query or a search engine, right? It becomes a system that you can think with. So what does that impose? So I would say 3 things. So what does that impose? It implies, I would say, that your imagination determines your capacity to work with these different thinking models in alignment, right? In parallel, you would say. So what does that kind of, like, when I say imagination, you're like, okay, so you're saying I just need to think bigger? And that's exactly what I'm saying. So what is imagination? It's a unique expression of individual conception and coherent comprehension. Fancy way of saying imagination is your capacity to communicate what you are thinking of, right? What you are imagining. So if you're working with language models and thinking models that also are imagining things, what does that imply? Now, I'm not going to get too biblical. Of course, this next part you can disagree with. I got this from Myron Golden as kind of a token. So if man's image was made in the image of God, and if you're assuming God's kind of original purpose and sort of his like creative power is to create and naturalize, like it's one of the first things, if not the first thing he did in the Bible, right? Or whatever religious text. So in understanding that, right, that leads you down this kind of land of 4 levels of value. So again, Myron Golden, an amazing resource if you're interested in this kind of stuff. I'm just glazing over it just to kind of show you the thought process. Even if you don't relate to the top part here, this next piece is really important. So again, I'm only illustrating this because mostly for illustrative purpose. Myron Golden also showcased it, and I felt like once I understood it, it allowed me to approach pretty much everything differently. So the 4 levels of value. The first one is implementation. So it's multiplying your muscle by time, right? That can earn you anywhere between 0 to 100K. Unification is by multiplying your capacity to manage and time. That can earn you anywhere between 100K and $1 million. Communication is being able to take your mind and your language skills and multiply that by time, right? That can give you returns anywhere from truly $1 million to hundreds of millions. And imagination being the top of it is your mind over strategy over time, right? Because the time is going to pass anyways. And as you kind of come to grips with that, you realize your mind and your strategy, your vision, your foresight over time is really all you have. Direction over speed, right? So with that in mind, why is that all important, especially for the AI side? So when I speak about imagination, there's a conceptual awareness around what that means. It's like you close your eyes almost and you can intentionally pursue an image, a visual in your mind. I do typically like a live workshop with this stuff. So there's tons of practices to kind of show you this next concept, which is introception. So introception, what it is your ability to visualize what's happening inside of your body at a given moment. So we introduce the time component. You see how that's related now. You introduce your not just imagination, right? Because that's, strategy, skills, muscle. You take all of that and you start to put it into your being over time, right? You become more by actually embodying what you imagined for yourself. So if that part, when you kind of take that in, you're understanding focal vision, right? It's your actual lens, your filter that you look at the world and you see the world through, right? You see what it can be. And I think that's one of the most empowering pieces around AI is it allows you an increased capacity to imagine, visualize, and create. So what does that really mean? It means you can now, with the assistance of a thinking model, offload the capacity to remember things. Obviously, still have your own memory as a human, but you do now have a technical capacity to offload that. You could do it through all sorts of means. You also have a capacity now to prioritize things. You had that as a human, right? It's organic intelligence first, but through focal vision, by giving it directive, by giving it strategy over time, you then are able to anticipate and know when things are going to happen because you've prioritized it and you've delegated it. What are the missing components in order to do that? It's the how and who, right? Who does it and how do they do it? Enter in agentic browsers. This piece is really where, when I show you it, you start to understand more and more. So I'm going to do rapid fire, just kind of take you guys through it. These are the different domains in which agentic web browsing changes things from before. Up until this point, right, as you can imagine with the different layers of AI that I articulated earlier, you basically have this siloed experience, this individual experience with artificial intelligence. Now, when you have it speaking to each other, we experience something called perspective. This is the last piece of theory, and I'll be able to throw in some cool visuals for you guys. This will really make things click. So, okay, I lied. There's two pieces of theory left. Zone of proximal development, and then the last piece, which is perspective. So, zone of proximal development. What is this? There are 3 layers in which people learn, right? So if you're not familiar with the concept, you have no idea what it's about, you don't think this is for you. You're probably hearing all this, and I haven't said jack about anything technical. I've purely been talking about mind and what you can create with that, which for some are like, all right, this is rudimentary. I'm going to skip through 1.2 times speed. But then you come to realize that when you start to move fast, there are gaps and you start to pick up a lot of material. So what does that imply? All right, I'm going to be sharing a 30-day program where you can do this, right? And have a full understanding of how to build this for yourself. From ground zero, non-technical business owners and managers, owner operators. If you're somebody that creates and you're overwhelmed and you're just kind of, your mind is running its strategy, your muscle is, I don't want to say worn because we're all strong, but if you've been going and going and going, this program's for you. So my goal, the premise, is to provide you something that you can do without guidance. However, that doesn't mean I don't offer guidance. That's pretty much my line of work, and that's what I do daily. So second piece of theory with a little bit of plug at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed that. The last piece, which I promise is a lot more engaging. And the reason I show that out is just to kind of, echo pretty much what I was saying earlier on. All right, what is all this crazy caveman stuff? Let me take you guys through it. So when I speak about organization, there are a few things that that typically relates to, right? That could be human capital, or that could just be systems at play that kind of do things for you, right? They're basically communication channels that allow you to understand perspective. So when you start to grasp that, you realize what kind of goes into, and again, forgive me for the caveman drawing. I know there's a circle thing there, but I went ahead and got creative one day. So basically what this implies is that if you have boss number 1 and boss number 2, in order for them to actually get messages across the team, they need to communicate either across the team or across each other. So for this one, we're going to open our mind beyond the primary colors, and see that there's an imaginary, sometimes real material communication line between one side of management to the other, right? So back to that piece I spoke about in terms of leadership, management, and then implementation. If you're in implementation, your focus is like right here, right? You're like, this is what I do. I'm responsible for this. I need to get this done. If you're on the management side of things, you're like, okay, I'm now taking responsibility or owning up, like taking ownership, I would say, of the responsibility. I then need to do better on my communication and my strategy. So if you can imagine, those are the two pieces. Strategy should be here. Communication should be here, right? So you kind of see the premise of how that moves. This, of course, is a very simplified scenario. The graphics you saw here. So you can imagine it gets more and more elaborate. If you don't have multiple direct managers, then you become a director. What does a director need to do? They need to communicate strategy effectively across. And that's what a real leader does, is they really illustrate very clearly what is happening now. And that's been mind-opening for me as I come to learn it. So when you're implementing intelligence systems, what you're really looking at is how can I implement new perspectives that I haven't seen myself. If I am in a position where I am just implementing managing, which is a great position to be in. It's an amazing learning opportunity. The leadership piece, the directive of that, gives us more, I want to say, written permission or creative permission, if that makes sense, to create bigger than what we were currently thinking, which is an amazing thing. Like if you have a capacity to see that and then be able to bring that into reality through your imagination, not only do you have a real talent, but a skill that's in high demand economically. So with that being said, right, all of this fun theory stuff, when it comes to AI and using it as an intelligence system for agentic browsing, here's what that really looks like. So where does all this theory live? Essentially, not having control or even access to your own personal faculty of mind, your own way of thinking, your own kind of reflective capacity. Using intelligence systems is directly correlated to that limit, which is not a problem. Right? That's a muscle. That's something we work with, myself included. I'm currently expanding the way that I do that. So in order to do that, how do I orient myself? With the intent to produce something useful for as many people as possible. With that as my underlying intention, the work that I do has to be oriented by that North Star. I'm not creating AI slop, as they would call it. I'm actually creating real solutions that empower people, not just in business, but even in personal life. So how does that kind of, again, live within the AI space?